Resuming debate, the honourable member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
I looked forward yesterday and today in engaging in this debate in this Parliament because this is a rare moment in this House when we get to talk about the actual fundamentals and principles of what it is to have leadership in this country. First, I would like to thank the member from Toronto Danforth for first proposing the very notion that we could take a bad piece of legislation and together make it better. Recently, Mr. Speaker, I had the great honour of spending time with the Nisga'a. I live in northwestern British Columbia and represent a region that is more than 30% First Nation, some of the longest and proudest traditions in our country's history. And the Nisga'a, at this time of year, have a tradition going back thousands of years. It's called Hobiye. And Hobiye is the bringing of the light from the darkness, is the calling back of the salmon to return to the rivers that sustain the people and have sustained them for generation after generation. And at this ceremony, Mr. Speaker, I had the great honor to be brought in with the chiefs in full regalia in front of hundreds of Nisga'a dancers and singers and drummers. And this ceremony, going back centuries, is a call to the leadership to have vision, to have courage, and to stand up in defense of the community, to provide the leadership that the community needs. And this is what the member from Toronto Danforth has done for this country in allowing this act to come back to Parliament, in demanding that its rewrite is done and done properly, and that we are able to have a free and fair vote, and that if this government and this House refuses, it no longer has the confidence of this Parliament and should be taken to task. When the leader of the New Democrats called many of us to Parliament, he gave us a very clear and simple direction, that while we would be in the opposition benches, we also must seek the place to not simply oppose, but to propose. Because there is something lacking in this country, and in particular around the debate on climate change, and that is for consistent and serious proposals that Canadians can get behind, and for once, Mr. Speaker, start to feel proud of the work of Parliament in this place. And that is exactly what the NDP did when the member from Toronto Danforth stood in his place, called upon the Prime Minister to create a special committee in which all parliamentarians could engage, in which Canadians could see in the full light of day our best ideas, the to and fro of debate to land upon and arrive at the best piece of environmental legislation to take on the greatest challenge this generation has faced. In the deliberations, and some members in the House right now were at those talks, we heard from Canadians from coast to coast to coast. We heard from industry. We heard from environmental groups, First Nations, labour activists, all about the best pieces to put into this legislation, because we all realized at first blush that this bill, when it first arrived, was dead upon arrival. There wasn't a hope of its passage, there wasn't enough credibility, and Canadians were simply not behind it. Through that process, through the engagement of Canadians, allowing us to have a fulsome debate and realize that yes, it can be done well, and that Parliament can finally take a lead in tackling dangerous climate change, of which we are seeing the effects each and every day in this country. Now, juxtapose that, Mr. Speaker, with the recent experience of all Canadians witnessing the absolute debacle that were the Bali negotiations at the UN, in which our minister went forward and stood side by side with the United States in opposing any progress on the challenge of climate change at the international level. And I spoke to one of the lead negotiators from Canada at the very end of this negotiation, when Canada was completely isolated. Even the US had left and joined with the UN, and Canada was standing alone. And I looked down at this negotiator's lapel pin because he had a Canadian flag. And we've been talking for some time, and I looked at his flag, and I just offhanded comment. I said, that's just such a wonderful, wonderful flag. It fills my heart with pride just to look at it. This flag's standing beside you, Mr. Speaker. And he looked down at it, and he said, do you know how hard it is to walk around with this flag at this negotiation? Do you realize how embarrassing, and these are his words, Mr. Speaker, how embarrassing it is to represent Canada's position, the position purported by this government? And I said, don't worry. For just as the Nisga'a celebrate the light coming from the darkness. We too will celebrate when this country gets back on track and represents the interests and views of Canadians on climate change. Now, we all share responsibilities of members of Parliament. Many of us have stood in our places in debates, at committee, in our constituencies, and across the country, recognizing what it was that first drew us in to a life of public service, to serve on behalf of the public, to understand what it is to truly represent people. In that representation is the requirement of leadership, is the requirement of vision, is a requirement to have the courage of our convictions, to stand in our place and vote for the things that we believe in, fight for the things that we believe in, and represent the people who sent us here to get good things done. And when we talk about climate change, just yesterday, the Commissioner of the Environment released a report, 14 chapters, 9 of which this government showed a failing grade on. I don't know if 35% on a test is acceptable to the Conservatives, but it's not acceptable to New Democrats, and it's not acceptable to Canadians. Every parliament is seized with scandals, with debate, and with central issues. I would suggest to you, Mr. Speaker, that this Parliament has been seized, has been called upon by the Canadian people to take on the challenge of climate change, to make the decisions necessary so that in some years hence, when we're all sitting and retired and looking back on our careers, we can say we did the right thing. We did the right thing not only for this generation, but for the generations to come. And I'm reminded again of being with the Nishka and listening to the songs and hearing the drummers and speaking with the leadership that goes back millennia about what is required in true leadership. That is, it is the role to speak on behalf of others, to speak with the courage, knowing that there are difficult decisions and that we must cross over partisan interests that may occupy us for the moment, that may seem important in the moment, to realize that new place where we can go to achieve something together that we can all share in, all be proud of, and return back to our constituencies, return back to those people who sent us here with pride in our eyes, knowing that we did the right thing. And this is what this motion calls for today. I and many of my colleagues in the New Democrats have spoken for many years. 1983, the NDP was the first group to raise the issue of climate change in this place. And for many, many years, it was shuffled off, put off as not a priority, as not a reality by some members who are sitting here today, as a complete fiction that we didn't need to deal with. And slowly but surely, the public became to understand the issue more, the science became more confirmed, and the path forward for all of us became more certain. Unfortunately, we still find ourselves in a place where the narrow, short-term partisan interests override the interests of the generations to come, override the interest of doing what is right for the planet, for our communities, and for our country. And that has to end. The NDP has been clear today. This is as clear as it comes, that the legislation that the will of this House has supported must be brought back to Parliament for a free and fair democratic vote, and if not, then this government no longer has the confidence of this Parliament and should be brought down.